From the very beginning, AJ Styles carried TNA on his back. He had been there through the ups and the downs. In 2013, it seemed unthinkable that he'd ever leave the company. But even the most loyal wrestlers have their breaking point. For AJ, it was a combination of bad creative decisions, poor financial choices, and feeling disrespected. In today's video, we'll take a look at how TNA lost their greatest homegrown talent and how that became the best decision of AJ's career. AJ Styles always felt like a homegrown TNA star. Despite getting his start in Ring of Honor back in 2002, WWE came knocking and offered him a developmental deal. However, it would have meant moving across the country, which he wasn't willing to do at the time. So, he decided to turn down their offer. A couple of months later, TNA was launched, and Styles became one of the most popular wrestlers on the roster. His matches against the likes of Samoa Joe and Christopher Daniels in the X Division were breathtaking. There was no way he could have had these kinds of matches in WWE at the time. As TNA continued to grow, so did AJ's career. He was now a legitimate main eventer, one of the very few TNA ever managed to produce. Even when the company started bringing in former WWE stars, the real TNA fans saw him as their guy. He was the homegrown talent who'd been there from day one, sticking with them through thick and thin. However, things were about to change when Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan arrived in 2010. There was optimism in the locker room, and AJ was hopeful too. After all, these were the guys who helped turn WCW into a giant in the 90s. But as they started making changes, it quickly became clear that Hogan and Bischoff would do more harm than good. The first sign of trouble was the decision to replace TNA's iconic six-sided ring. Bischoff thought a four-sided ring looked more professional, but the fans disagreed, and AJ agreed with them. The six-sided ring was unique, something that set TNA apart from WWE. Hogan and Bischoff continued bringing in more former WWE stars like Jeff Hardy, Rob Van Dam, Ric Flair, and others. These big names were supposed to bring attention to the product, but in doing so, they pushed aside the original TNA talent. For AJ, this was going to negatively affect him. In April 2010, AJ lost the World Heavyweight Championship to Rob Van Dam, who had only recently joined the company. Styles was furious with the decision, and what upset him even more than losing the title was the fact that there was no storyline reason for the match to happen. RVD simply showed up, beat Jeff Hardy to become the #1 contender, and then defeated AJ for the title. This decision by Eric Bischoff made it clear that he had no faith in AJ as a main eventer. What happened next proved that point even further. Bischoff believed AJ lacked character and needed a proper gimmick. But instead of letting AJ develop his own ideas or come up with something that suited him, they paired him with Ric Flair. As Flair aligned himself with AJ, it quickly became clear that AJ wasn't just going to be his manager. He had to cosplay as the Nature Boy. He started dressing like him, adopting some of Flair's mannerisms, and even faced pressure to dye his hair blonde. Thankfully, that suggestion was vetoed, but AJ went along with it and tried to make the best of the situation. Bischoff thought this was a way to elevate AJ's character, but it felt forced and the fans didn't take to it. This wasn't a knock on AJ, he didn't need to be Ric Flair. Styles had his own kind of charisma, as we'd later see in WWE. Flair went on to form a Four Horsemen knockoff called Fortune, meaning AJ had to keep playing the Nature Boy for over a year. Eventually, Fortune came to an end, and Styles was allowed to return to just being himself. For months, AJ wasn't happy with the changes taking place in the company, especially with Bischoff's terrible creative decisions. One of the worst was a storyline that wouldn't have looked out of place on a daytime soap opera. The storyline began with Christopher Daniels and Kazarian revealing that AJ was having a secret affair with TNA president Dixie Carter and a character named CLA Lynch, who was presented as a drug addict that AJ was helping to recover. Daniels and Kazarian claimed that not only was AJ romantically involved with CLA, but he was also the father of her child. AJ found himself stuck in a love triangle where he had to deny fathering the baby of a crack addict. To make matters worse, the actress playing CLA was so bad that fans started harassing her online, leading her to quit the company. The storyline was eventually dropped, but it remains one of wrestling's most infamous moments. It showed how out of touch Bischoff was with what fans wanted and how little he understood AJ Styles as a performer. By 2013, it was clear that AJ's relationship with TNA was on thin ice. Years of poor creative decisions and being sidelined in favor of former WWE stars had left him feeling frustrated and alienated. But the final straw came when they asked him to take a 60% pay cut. AJ had been the beating heart of TNA since the very beginning. He was the guy who carried the company through thick and thin. But after more than a decade of loyalty, they asked him to take a 60% pay cut. It was an insult. TNA's financial problems were well known at this point, and Hogan and Bischoff had driven the company into the ground with their bad decisions. Meanwhile, TNA had been spending money on ex-WWE stars without growing their audience. Yet the guy who helped build the company was offered a lowball contract. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. In December 2013, after contract negotiations fell apart, AJ decided enough was enough and quit TNA. It would have been unthinkable just a couple of years earlier, but the frustration had become too much. There was a spot waiting for him in Japan, and AJ knew that over there, he would be treated with respect and paid what he was worth. By all accounts, AJ had a great run in New Japan Pro Wrestling. But after a few years, it was time to return home. With both Bischoff and Hogan gone from TNA, AJ briefly considered going back out of loyalty to Dixie Carter. But just like in 2002, WWE came calling again. This time, it was Triple H on the phone, and AJ knew that Triple H would support smaller wrestlers on the roster. It felt right this time, and AJ signed the contract. In a 2016 interview, AJ admitted that he didn't shed a single tear when he left TNA. That's kind of sad, considering the history he had with the company. But in the end, TNA had worn him down. Leaving was probably the best decision he ever made.